So Robert, what do we're gonna start with New York because can I swear? I haven't had the gin yet. So no, I'm not gonna swear, but I'm gonna have gin soon. What the fudge, Robert? Okay. So the question I texted you beforehand because I wanted to make sure I could get clear on it before going on Alex Jones. The initial order from Engeron to dissolve the businesses was stayed pending appeal. In this particular order, Engeron abandoned the dissolution of the business certificate and just went with certain executives can't be on the board for 3 years or whatever. They can't act as executives for 3 years, depending on who it is. And a disgorgement. Just a cool $355 million. I don't think people.
That was pre-interest.
Oh, that's what I was just going to get to. Because I don't think people know this. There's $98 million in pre-judgment interest at 9%. So when the government can't generate its own wealth, it's going to seize the assets of private citizens and then impose 9% interest for the court, for justice. It's just over the top. Some people out there are saying that this was something of a judgment on the merits because the summary judgment was only on the fraud as relates to Mar-a-Lago. I think that's wrong, Robert. Is that not wrong?
It's partially wrong. In other words, there were aspects of the case that were left for bench trial, but the summary judgment still presides over large parts of the case. So in other words, like half the case had already been pre-decided, another half was decided at this level. But it was more the remedy, honestly, than anything else, because he had eviscerated most of the defense, both by denying a jury trial and by denying a lot of evidence to be admitted and by making a summary adjudication in the first place. It wasn't a surprise if you had been watching this judge, but you could tell a lot of Americans were shocked by it. Because most Americans had only, barely tuned in at all to anything going on. And I think a lot of business people were bothered by it.
Mm-hmm.
You saw people who are not pro-Trump come out and say this is one of the most outrageous verdicts ever. And what we had been warning about now for years about this case, all of a sudden they started to realize, this is what the government can do. This is what corrupt courts can do. It's like it's a little late to wake up, but yes, the fact this case was ever being pursued in the first place was completely groundless and baseless. There was no fraud claim. This is a misuse and abuse of state power. The nature of the verdict violates in not only a lot of New York law, but in my view, violates both the due process and excessive fine clauses of the Constitution because it's disproportionate. For example, jury is not allowed to do punitive damages. So other side of the bargain, testifying in favor of Trump.
Well,
it's unheard of.
Testifying.
You're saying there was a fraud when the people you claim were defrauded are testifying in favor of the defendant.
And testifying in favor of the defendant, but after the summary judgment, so that it wasn't even as though it was going to have an impact on the finding of liability already. And the judge called it disgorgement of ill-gotten gains, to say that he didn't pay enough in interest because he didn't pay enough in interest because he overvalued his assets. So the banks, the Deutsche Bank, gave him preferential interest rates on loans.
He knows it's a lie. The judge is lying. That's why if these judges want to start taking away immunity from President Trump, then there needs to be a response by the legislatures to take away immunity from judges, because this is a judge who, under traditional civil rights law, should be criminally prosecuted. Now, that Trump should have the right to civilly sue him, and the government should have the right to criminally prosecute Judge Engeron because he's a criminal. That's what he is. He lied in his order. He's a fraud. He's a fake. He's a phony. He doesn't obey his oath. He doesn't abide the law, and he lied in his order. There is no basis whatsoever to say in a honest transaction more interest would have been charged. Every bank said no. Every bank said they would not have done anything differently. They would do it exactly the same again, and they never relied upon any of Trump's claims for why he thought he was going to be able to pay it back. They relied on their own independent appraisers. This is why people in the real estate industry and the finance world went berserk. People who don't care about Trump at all were like, this is one of the most dangerous verdicts ever issued in the history of the country, because you're basically criminalizing everyday business. You're criminalizing how every business operates. Every business puts together a business plan which has their most optimistic version of what's going to happen when they're trying to get money from people. That's simple. And it's on the party lending. These are the most sophisticated creditors in the entire world. Some of the biggest international banks in the entire world. They don't rely upon the person's claims. That tells them why that person thinks they're going to pay back the debt, and they like to have that information. But that's not why they give the money. They give the money based on their own independent assessment of worst case scenario. That's what they do, and that loan, it made the bank tons of money. Not only in the interest rates, but the fact they were Trump's bank got them other business, as they themselves testified to. Said so at the time, testified to under oath, when there was every motivation to otherwise. That's why people are shocked that you can bankrupt a business that's never caused any harm. You can bankrupt a business that's committed no crime. You can bankrupt a business that committed no fraud. And everybody knows why, because you don't like his politics. This is worse than anything ever done or even claimed to have been done to Navalny in Russia, that supposedly is grounds to go to war with a country. Our government is doing it right now. Our country is doing it right now. Worse, more egregious. And Trump has rights to appeal. Presumably, the New York Court of Appeals will not stay aslumber and will wake up and do the right thing, but you can't bank on that. This is a lazy New York Court of Appeals that approved ridiculous gag orders in this case. After initially recognizing how absurd they were, then they backed off because they're just as political, just as partisan as the trial courts are. So there needs to be so much outrage from so many places that the courts realize, oh, maybe we've gone too far. And what really needs to happen is members of Congress need to start proposing legislation, modify and clarify what should have always been there under Section 1983 of Title 42 involving state judges, and say we remove judicial immunity. Say there is no more immunity for judges. Watch judges all of a sudden be like, oh, well, hold on. We didn't mean to go that far. That's the only thing that's going to wake them up. They need to be smacked in the face with political reality, or they will continue to misuse and abuse their power. And then on the federal court systems, they need to start impeachment proceedings on these rogue judges. But with the state courts, where you don't have, New York State legislature is never going to do anything about these corrupt judges because they're aligned with them. But the federal government could, Congress could, put it clear. The 1983 laws were intended to remove judicial immunity. The courts invented it. Supreme Court conveniently invented it. It's always great when you can invent your own immunity, isn't it? When you can ignore our own statutes. But put it in plain language so that they can't ignore it. And you watch these courts suddenly wake up. Suddenly, all of a sudden, realize there's limits to what they do and start stopping the extraordinary misuse and abuse of what Stephen Miller and others called modern-day fascism, is what we have in New York courts right now, and in the federal courts when it comes to Donald Trump.
Explain. I mean, I think I've asked this question a few times, and I have trouble grasping the answer. It's a state decision, so it's going to go to the state court of appeal.
Yep.
How does the Supreme Court get involved?
Now, he has federal cases pending because he brought multiple federal civil rights cases, both in New York and Florida, before the Court of Appeals about this abusing his federal civil rights.
Okay.
So so there is an opportunity for the federal courts to get involved as well. And it could go up to the Supreme Court of the United States because there are federal constitutional implications to what took place here.
Okay, excellent. And there's also apparently a boycott of truckers who are saying we're not going to bring stuff to New York if this is the way business is going to be there. Defiant New Yorkers.
I mean, and I've been saying for more than a decade, advised clients, get out of California, get out of New York, get out of Illinois. And they hated doing it. A lot of them, grew up there. A lot of them really loved it. Told Alex Jones for many years, get out of Austin. He loved Austin, didn't want to move from Austin, okay. Now he realizes why, that was not the best decision in the world. But this should be a screaming wake up call. Look at what Musk did. Musk realized as soon as Delaware went crazy, he's like, okay, I've got to remove every business from Delaware and tell every other business, get out of Delaware. And that's the only thing that's going to wake up Delaware courts. Delaware courts only have the business they have and the power they have because they were perceived as politically impartial courts that would not be impacted, that would respect the business deference rule and the business judgment rule. Once they didn't do that as to Elon Musk, and Elon understands it. I mean, he's also said the reason why he bought Twitter is he recognized they were politically coming after him, and they continue to politically come after him because he's promoting free speech. But he realized you have to fight back. You have to fight back. And one of the ways everybody should be getting out of New York. Get out of New York. It's an untrustworthy, if you're delusional enough to think it won't happen to you, you are acting in a state of delusion. I had a client who believed that, and then they started coming after him full scale in California. And luckily, he put enough things in motion that they weren't able to do him much harm. Now, he, by the way, left the United States entirely and put almost every business he has that he can outside of the United States. Because in truth, there are plenty of foreign countries that are better right now for doing business than the United States of America. But definitely not New York, definitely not California, definitely not Illinois, definitely not Delaware. Don't be near these. And if you can get out of democratic cities like Atlanta, like Austin, get out of those too.
Okay, so they've announced the appeal. Does he have to put up anything by way of bond in order to appeal? Like, what is the immediate?
I assume the state's not going to attempt to collect while the case is pending appeal.
I wouldn't make that assumption, Robert.
You never know.
All right, well, that's the level of corruption coming out of New York, but let's go from one corrupt state to another corrupt state that's a little bit to the south.